The night it happened, thunder crawled over the hills like something alive, pressing its weight against the windows, while the chandelier trembled above the dining table she picked out when we were happy. The house smelled like rosemary, garlic, and the red wine she loved too quickly, and somewhere between the laughter and the clink of crystal I decided I could finally breathe again. Because the plan was no longer just a plan, it was a heartbeat, steady and unshakable in my chest. She begged me to talk days before this, her calls flooding my phone with apologies, but tonight wasn't about words. Tonight was about memory, a permanent one, and I intended to carve it into her life like a scar she could never cover. My name is David and I used to be soft. I thought softness was the same as love, letting her moods crash over our mornings, letting her choose for me, letting her make mistakes because she called them harmless. Emily had that kind of light that makes people forgive her before she even asks for it. She collected people like she collected scented candles. The room smelled like citrus and no one questioned the smoke. The first hint that something was wrong wasn't his cologne. It was silence. Silence where there should have been a sigh, a yawn, a laugh that melted into mine at the end of the night. Silence and then secrecy. And then the weekend she told me she needed time to recalibrate, like love was a thermostat and I was the draft. The private investigator handed me everything, photos of their hands wrapped around paper cups, of a hotel room with a balcony that looked over a muted blue skyline, of her in that green dress she promised she'd thrown away because it reminded her of a man she once thought she loved. The pies spoke in terms like timestamps and receipts and chain of custody. All I saw was the shape of her shoulder pressed into a stranger. It wasn't even the body, it was her face, soft, free. Mine used to look like that when she walked into the room. He had a name, Steve. It fit too easily, it felt like a placeholder the universe forgot to replace with something difficult to say. In his emails, he wrote to her like someone playing a role, lover and savior and comedian, and she responded like someone being watched. She performed, she always performed. But at 1:14 a.m., buried in the seventh reply of a thread titled Simply Tomorrow, she wrote one sentence that didn't feel like acting. I hate the way his voice makes me feel safe. His meaning me. That sentence didn't cut, it cored. I didn't confront her, not yet. I learned how to look at her without looking. I learned the choreography of restraint. I learned her timing, her showers, the cadence of her hair dryer, the way her keys sounded when she came home after midnight and tried to be quiet. I met a lawyer who didn't blink when I gave him what he needed. He called it clean, he called it airtight, he called it mercy. I didn't know mercy looked like paperwork. I thought mercy looked like hands not breaking. She loved hosting. She loved being adored inside our home more than she loved being adored anywhere else, so I gave her one last stage. Let's do a dinner, I said, leaning on the kitchen island, making a joke about how we hadn't had everyone over in months. She blinked once, twice, like guilt had fogged her pupils, then smiled big enough to cover it. She texted the group thread, she chose the menu. She practiced her tenderness against my shoulder at night and pretended it fit. I spent those days learning how to breathe in small, invisible gestures. Measuring table runners, counting wine glasses, polishing the silver my mother gave us when she finally accepted that I'd picked someone too bright and too beautiful for our quiet family. I took out the envelope every night and ran my finger over my name, David Carlyle, in black print. I slept on the guest room couch the night before, under a blanket that held none of her warmth. I slept, and when I woke, the thunder was already climbing. The night of the dinner, the house turned into a glass box of sound and heat. People brought laughter, and she wore a red dress that said, "Remember me," to a room that already did. He came, of course. Steve, with his watch too shiny and his smile too careful, introduced himself to our friends as a work colleague, and I felt a strange calm press cold against my ribs. The lawyer I'd hired sat quietly near the entryway, a pleasant nobody with a soft tie and a folder under his chair, invisible until he wasn't. She squeezed my arm before dessert. "Are you okay?" she whispered into my sleeve, as if the fabric could steal the words and keep them from me. I nodded, I stood, I tapped my glass. The first note rang like an alarm everyone pretended not to hear. "Thank you all for coming," I said, and my voice did not shake. She turned toward me, eyes widened, a small question forming behind her teeth. "Emily and I have something to share." When I handed her the envelope, time slowed to the speed of grief. The paper made that soft shiver sound when she pulled it free. Her fingers trembled. She read fast, then slowly, then again. The color drained from her face in bands, like someone turning a dimmer switch. "David," she said, the syllables clinging to each other. "What is this?" The lawyer stood. The folder opened. Photographs became leaves in a storm. "It's a divorce agreement," I said, my voice a floor. "And before anyone asks, yes. I know about you and Steve." The room learned a new shape. Friends recoiled, someone swore under their breath, someone else put a hand to their chest like a church gesture. Emily tried to blink herself into another world. Steve stood up and didn't know where to put his hands. I turned to the lawyer and he began to distribute what truth looks like when printed. The whispers became a sound with teeth. "Please," Emily begged, first to me, then to the floor, then to the photographs. "Please, can we talk, just us?" Her mascara framed her eyes like parentheses. I looked at her and thought about the line she wrote at 1:14 a.m. I thought about how safety had become a jail she resented. Privately, I said, allowing a laugh to climb to my mouth and die there. You didn't choose privacy when you used my life like a stage. I turned to Steve, who took one involuntary step backward. Your wife has everything she needs. Expect to hear from her counsel. When it was over, it wasn't over. The dinner ended, but the night did not release its grip. People left in trios of shock, and the house grew too quiet too quickly. Emily sat in my chair with the papers clutched like a life raft, her chest heaving, her mouth open like she was learning how to breathe. I walked past her, past the empty plates, past the vase of lilies bruised by too many hands. I stood in the doorway and felt the rain's first cold finger touch my temple. It felt like a beginning, it felt like an ending. It felt like something I would make sure she never forgot. The morning after, the house held the weight of a theater after the audience leaves. Confetti of napkins, a fallen fork under a chair, the echo of applause that curdles into shame. Emily slept on the couch, not because I told her to, but because gravity did. She woke to the sound of coffee, to the smell of dark roast churning like an engine in the kitchen, and to the envelope sitting neatly on the coffee table as if it had tucked itself in for the night. She didn't look at me when I entered. She looked at the mug I placed beside the papers and flinched as if kindness now had teeth. Talk to me, she whispered. There it was, the plea she had texted and called and cried in voicemails, talk to me. As if the shape of conversation could undo the shape of betrayal. What she really meant was, please give me a rope. Please let me climb out of the pit I dug while you were sleeping 2 feet away. I leaned against the counter and watched the steam unravel from her cup. You want truth, I said. I'm giving you truth on paper, in process, in front of everyone you invited into our marriage. I made a mistake, she said, the oldest sentence in the book, the one that arrives with excuses nested inside like Russian dolls. I lost myself, I didn't know how to. She stopped. I waited. We were 2 people standing at opposite ends of a bridge she burned. Do you know what you made me feel like? I asked, not loudly. Her eyes blinked fast, ready to catch every word. Unchosen. I let the word drop between us like a heavy coin. Every day, every night, while you curated your performance with him, I became background noise in my own house. She moved like she might fold into herself. I didn't do it to hurt you. A new sentence, as useless as a broken lock. That's the part you'll never understand, I said. You didn't do it to hurt me. You did it because hurting me didn't matter. Silence poured into the room. I could hear the refrigerator hum, the tiny sound of the clock hand ticking toward a new minute. Outside, the sky gathered itself into a gray sheet. What do you want me to do? She asked finally, the way a child asks a parent to tell them where to stand. I wanted to tell her, feel it, sit in the crater you made, but I had already begun teaching her something else. Memory, consequence, the kind that doesn't fade when a new man tells you that you're special. I'm not here to teach you anymore, I said. I'm here to end what you hollowed out. I lifted the envelope and put it in her hands again. Sign your copy. She looked at me like I'd asked her to pull out her own ribs. Please, David, she said, voice catching. We can try counseling. We can, I shook my head. We had a marriage, Emily, not a project. The following week, life became a machine. My lawyer turned moments into motions. Her lawyer, a woman with kind eyes and a voice like late-night radio, called to ask for grace where the law wouldn't. The PI closed his file. My house, shed her photographs one frame at a time until the walls felt like they were breathing again. She moved into the guest room, the one with the blue quilt and the lamp with a dimmer switch that always stuck. At night, I could hear her cry with the muffled persistence of a faucet that won't turn off. I didn't go to her. I learned the difference between cruelty and boundary, and I stood on the right side. Steve tried to call, I let it go to voicemail. I listened anyway. He asked for some kind of understanding, man, as if we were colleagues on a team and he just missed a pass. He said he'd end it with her if it helped. He said, I don't love her, and then he said, I love her in the same message, and in those 2 sentences I heard the exact kind of emptiness she fell for. I sent the voicemail to his wife's attorney. I did not feel good, I felt accurate. Friends pick sides the way people always do when a bomb goes off in their circle. Some called me brave, some called me cruel. Most said nothing, and that silence told me exactly who they were. My mother left a pie on my porch like prayer. My brother sent me a link to an article about radical acceptance. I closed the link. I did not want acceptance yet, I wanted clean edges. The day she signed, it rained so hard the gutters sobbed. She slid the papers across the kitchen table and looked up at me with eyes I didn't recognize. Not because they were empty. Because they were honest. I thought if you left me quietly, I could pretend it wasn't my fault, she said. I thought if you shouted, I could pretend you were cruel, but this, she touched the clean stack of signatures with 2 fingers. This is worse, I nodded once. Then it's working, I said, not kindness, not vengeance, memory, but memory is a living thing, not a picture, and mine began to move at night. It crawled out of the guest room like fog under the door. It sat at the edge of my bed and whispered the line she wrote at 1:14 a.m. Safe, safe, safe. It asked me whether I had been a shelter or a cage. It demanded I answer questions she never could have asked without breaking herself open. In the dark, I learned that my intention hadn't just been to expose her. It had been to protect my own story from rot. to save the version of me that believed in warmth without suspicion. I lay there, the thunder returned, and I wondered if the thing I wanted most was somehow still on the table, to be chosen freely and without performance. When the decree arrived, final, stamped, complete, I didn't feel triumph. I felt a door close softly in a house that had too many. The lawyer called it quick. The state called it dissolved. I called it a wound with edges that finally met. That night she knocked on my door. I let her in. She didn't ask to stay. She didn't ask to fix it. She asked me for one thing. "Please talk to me," she said, voice soft as wet wood. "Please, just once, not to bargain, to understand." I thought of the dinner, of the envelope, of the way her breath hitched when the world turned and she couldn't stop it. I thought of the quiet mercy in turning facts into air. I stepped aside. "Okay," I said, "sit." She sat cross-legged on the floor like she used to when she was painting her toenails, and I sat on the edge of the bed, and between us was the space where a life had lived. "Start with the truth," I said, "the kind you would never write in an email." Outside, the rain slowed. Inside, something else began. She didn't launch into excuses. She didn't cue the violins. She looked at the carpet fibers between her fingers as if they were instructions. "I didn't cheat because I was unhappy," she said, and I felt an odd anger flare at the new shape of her honesty. "I cheated because I was scared of being known." She let the sentence breathe. "You loved me fully. I don't know how to live under full light. I only know how to perform in it." I wanted to ask her if that was supposed to comfort me. I wanted to ask her if being known meant being bored, but the room asked for something different. "So you pick someone who doesn't look too closely," I said. She nodded. "He looked at the stage." "You looked at me," she laughed, then a broken sound. "He told me I was perfect. You told me where I was hurting. I chose applause because I didn't want to hear the wound." A part of me unclenched, not the part that loved her. The part that accused me of failing. "I didn't keep you safe," I said before I could stop myself. She looked up quick. "You were the safest thing in my life," she said, surprising us both. That was the problem. Safety felt like a mirror that never moved. I am not good at being steady. I mistook steadiness for a trap. We sat inside that paradox and let it ache. Her knees pulled up to her chest. My hands folded like prayer without the belief. "Do you love him?" I asked finally. Her mouth opened, closed, opened. "I loved being unaccountable," she said. "I loved not being measured." She swallowed. "I don't love him." It should have landed like relief. Instead, it landed like a last small theft of meaning, of explanation, of an enemy I could point to and say, "This is why." "I did something you'll never forget," I said, and heard the steel in it, the vow that tasted like pennies in my mouth. She looked at me, eyes shining but steady. "You did," she said. "You taught me what it costs to use a person like a stage. You taught me what consequence feels like when it isn't cruelty. You taught me how memory can be heavier than punishment." She took a breath. "I will never forget." I thought the conversation might unspool the knot inside me. It didn't. It turned it into a different knot, one made of threads I hadn't seen. The way I had sometimes loved her like a project to fix, how my steadiness could condescend without meaning to, how my silence, my favorite form of dignity, sometimes felt like a wall to someone raised in houses where shouting meant love. None of that excused the betrayal, but it complicated the landscape. And complexity is its own kind of mercy when it keeps you from becoming a statue of your own righteousness. Days thinned into a routine of division. Furniture lists, account closures, keys in a small bowl by the door for her to return when she came to gather what was hers. I found our wedding album and sat on the floor cross-legged, where she had sat and turned pages until my eyes blurred. Her laugh on page 3, my father's hand on my shoulder on page 7, the cake we smeared on each other's noses like children. A poem my sister read that made Emily cry into her bouquet and made me swear I would make her feel safe forever. I closed the book and placed it in a box marked hers. It wasn't penance, it was accurate. Steve's life fell apart the way poorly built scaffolding falls, loud, fast, and with an audience. I didn't watch, but the updates arrived anyway. His wife filed, his company put him on leave, his gym friends stopped sending him invites. Emily moved through those headlines like someone who had set fire to a field and now had to walk through the smoke. She didn't run to him, she didn't run to me. She went to work, came back to the guest room, and learned the taste of quiet without applause. One evening, a week after the decree, she left a small box on the kitchen island. Inside, the green dress folded so carefully it felt like reverence. On top a note, 3 lines, neat, unadorned. "I don't know who wore this. It wasn't me. Thank you for not letting me pretend." I stared at the cloth, the way it caught the light even without a body. I closed the lid and carried it to the trash, then paused. I didn't throw it away. I put it in the attic, in a corner where things go to lose their sharp edges. I told myself I was done, that the story had been written, performed, and closed. But endings are only true when the body believes them, and mine did not. I woke at 2:11 a.m. with my heart hammering like a door someone was trying to break. I walked the hall, put my palm against the guest room door, and felt the mute pulse of another person's grief. I considered knocking. I considered leaving forever in the morning. Instead, I went downstairs and stood in the dark kitchen, listening to the house breathe. That's when the phone buzzed, a number I didn't know, a text message that landed like a spark on dry grass. "We should talk," it said. You don't know everything, another buzz. A photo from a number I recognized now that my stomach had turned. The pie, not a photo of Emily, not a photo of Steve. A photo of a hotel room receipt dated 3 weeks after the dinner, two names listed. Emily's and mine, the room was in my name, paid with my card, my breath shortened. The pie's text followed, fraud, someone used your profile to book their meetups. It ties you to the rooms. Could complicate your clean exit if they push. The floor shifted, the knot reformed. The story, it seemed, had decided it wasn't finished with me. It was almost funny if anything about it had been. I had built a clean narrative like a scaffolding of steel, and now there was this rotten plank underfoot, an accounting trick, a petty fraud, a postscript that tried to turn my certainty into mud. I called the pie. He answered on the first ring. I wanted to tell you in person, he said, but you didn't pick up yesterday. He walked me through the details. The card numbers skimmed at a restaurant months ago, their quiet use for rooms and rideshares, how the bookings in my name lined up with weekends she was recalibrating. It wasn't an absolution. It was a complication. The universe loves those. What does this change? I asked, voice flat. It gives her leverage if she wants to rewrite the story, he said. It could muddy your clean lines. If it goes public, it looks like you funded your own humiliation. I thanked him. I hung up. I stared at the coffee maker like it had answers. It sputtered and hissed and did what it always did, turn water bitter and hot. Emily appeared in the doorway, hair tied, face unadorned. What's wrong? She asked, then stopped herself, as if asking me anything now was a theft. I handed her the phone with the photo open. She looked, her lips parted. I didn't know, she said quietly. I believed her, not because I wanted to, because the shock looked unperformed. I'll write a statement, she said quickly. I'll sign whatever you need. I won't let this stain you. A bitter laugh almost escaped me. I swallowed it. Stains don't ask permission, I said. They just spread. She stepped closer, not close enough to touch. I know penance isn't a check box, she said. But let me do this one thing right. That's when I understood what it was I desperately wanted and what stood in my way. I wanted my life back without her fingerprints. I wanted a version of me that never walked into the thunderlit dining room with an envelope. I wanted the kind of safety you don't have to explain. The obstacle wasn't her anymore. It was the story itself, how it had fused to my name, how it had turned me into a man whose defining act was a spectacle of truth. I had won the night, but the night had branded me. We sat at the table where she had signed away a marriage and made a plan, not for us, but for the memory of me. She contacted the bank. I filed a report. The pie prepared a packet that mapped every fraudulent booking to stolen credentials. Her lawyer, to her credit, sent a notarized letter stating under penalty of perjury that the rooms had been arranged by third parties, that I'd been unaware that the pattern matched a theft. It was tidy. It was almost elegant. It didn't make me feel clean. It made me feel like a man stepping carefully through a field where mines had been planted by strangers. That night she knocked again, not to talk, to return the last key. It sat in her palm, small and indifferent. I'm moving tomorrow, she said. My sister's guest room, I nodded. The key caught the light. Do you want to see the house one last time? I asked, surprising both of us. She looked behind me, past my shoulder, into the hallway, as if the house could answer. Yes, she said, and the word was a thread. We walked the rooms quietly. The living room where we'd argued about paint colors and laughed so hard we cried watching a dumb movie on a Tuesday night. The kitchen where she had burned toast and I had made omelets too salty because I liked flavor to announce itself. The bedroom where we promised things in the dark and kept most of them until she didn't. The guest room where she had learned silence, the attic ladder which I pulled down and climbed first. She followed careful and I lifted the box with the green dress and placed it between us. Why didn't you throw it away? She asked. Because pretending it never happened is just another kind of lie, I said. Objects learn forgiveness when they gather dust. She almost smiled, almost. In the attic's dusty light, she said the one thing that would lodge in me for months. I am not asking for you back, she said. I am asking for the version of you that still believes love can be safe to survive this, even if he never meets me again. She swallowed. Please don't let what I did be the end of him. The plea wasn't for her, it was for the man I was before the thunder, the one I had built the spectacle to save. She left the next morning, the house exhaled. I stood in the doorway and let the day lay itself open. The pie's packet was filed, the bank's report was logged, the narrative was secured against the one weakness it didn't deserve. The neighbors waved like nothing had changed, everything had. I spent the first day alone, making the bed the way I liked it, organizing the pantry with a precision that looked like madness from the outside. And then, when night slid into the room, I did the thing I had not allowed myself. I cried. Not the kind that begs, the kind that lets the body do what it knows to do when it finally understands. The life it built has ended. Days arranged themselves into a new form. I went to work. I returned calls. I said yes to drinks with friends who knew not to say you're better off. I visited my mother and fixed the shelf in her laundry room. I learned the names of the neighborhood dogs. I slept on my side of the bed and didn't reach for a ghost. Weeks like that can make a man believe in recovery the way a new believer trusts a gentle preacher. But healing is not a straight road. It loops, it doubles back, it hides nails in the floor. On a Wednesday heavy with heat, I found a letter in the mailbox with no return address. Inside, one line in a hand I recognized but couldn't place. You think you know who started it. No signature, no explanation. Just a shape of threat that made the air tilt. I looked at the street, I looked at the house. I looked at the attic ladder and thought of the dress, the key, the box. Open loops do not close themselves. The story I had ended in front of a room might not be done. The question uncoiled, what if the betrayal that undid my life began long before the first whisper? And with whom? The thunder was gone, the sky was blue, the cliff arrived anyway. The letter didn't leave my pocket for days. I folded and unfolded it at red lights at my desk, in the grocery store line beneath humming fluorescents that made everyone look slightly haunted. You think you know who started it. The sentence had a sneer baked into it, like someone correcting me without offering the correction. The pie was cautious. Could be noise, he said, could be him. Could be someone bored. He told me to install a camera, he told me to breathe, he told me to let dust settle, but dust is where secrets write themselves. I sat in the dining room, the scene of the crime, as friends called it when they tried to make light, and stared at the chandelier. I remembered the first night it hung, when Emily insisted on dimming it to just this side of drama. I remembered her face in that glow, softer than a confession, and the way it made me want to build her a world with only clean edges. I closed my eyes and a memory stepped out of the dark I hadn't invited. My brother at our engagement party, leaning in low, voice careful, asking me if I was ready to love a woman who loved attention more than shelter. I had laughed and clapped him on the back. She's a lighthouse, I'd said, that's how she points me home. I called my brother, I told him about the letter. He sighed in a way that felt like a hand on my shoulder. You want to know the truth? He asked. I braced. You didn't start this, she didn't start this. The beginning was the day you decided you could save someone from the parts of themselves they weren't ready to lose. He let that hang there. You loved her like a cure, people aren't diseases. I wanted to argue, I didn't. The letter in my pocket burned. The second letter arrived 2 days later, different paper, same handwriting. Check her emails from before the pie. The deleted folder, I called the pie, heart thudding. He hesitated. I didn't pull deleted content without a warrant, he said. I can try a recovery if she consents. She did. The consent came quickly, a text with a yes and a period. The recovery took 12 hours. In the inbox that wasn't meant to be seen, in a string of drafts that were never sent, were messages to a name I didn't recognize, Clara. Each one careful, each one raw. I keep choosing light that burns me, one read. He loves me in complete sentences. I don't know how to answer without ellipses. Another. I kissed Steve because I wanted to be anyone else for a minute. Then the minute kept asking for more. And then the one that made something in me soften and harden at the same time. I told David I was okay when my dad relapsed. I wasn't. I didn't tell him because I wanted to be the strong half. Then I punished him for believing me. The story I had made clean, cruel, righteous got crowded. There were fathers and relapses and the kind of inherited ache that teaches a child how to perform survival while confusing intimacy with threat. None of it transmuted betrayal into something holy. All of it complicated the math. Beneath the drafts was one more note, tiny and unsent. If he ever leaves me, I hope he does it with the truth, not anger. Truth I can live with. The dinner rose in my mind like a stage direction. I had done what she said she hoped for. I had also burned it into her skin. I met Clara, coffee, noon, a small table near the window. She was older than Emily by a decade, with a therapist's posture and a friend's eyes. She asked me not to interfere, Clara said, stirring a drink she didn't sip. But she also asked me to help if you ever needed context. Context is a polite word for the mess behind the curtain. Clara talked about Emily's childhood, the way love arrived in bursts and left without warning, how applause had been currency at her house, how secrets felt like blankets. She did not excuse, she illuminated. You tried to build her a cathedral, she said to me. She grew up in tents. When I left the cafe, the sun felt too bright for a man thinking about tents and cathedrals. I drove without choosing a destination and ended up at the bluff outside the city where the skyline stacks itself like a promise. I took out my phone and typed a message to Emily that I did not send. I am not a cure. You are not a symptom. We were a house that caught fire. I deleted it. I sat on the hood of the car and let the wind tell me something I had been avoiding. I couldn't build my future against the image of what she had done. I had to build it around the version of me worth keeping, the one who could love without turning love into a test. That night, the third letter arrived. It was not written. It was a printed photo, me at the dinner, glass lifted, mouth open mid-sentence, eyes clear. On the back, in that same neat hand, a single line, "This is where you became someone new." No threat, no sneer, a benediction almost. I turned it over and stared at the man frozen under the chandelier. He looked like me and someone else layered atop me. He looked, I realized, like a man who had chosen truth over performance. He looked, for the first time in months, like he might be safe in his own skin. Open loops closed themselves not because I forced them, but because I had learned to stop feeding them. The fraud case was resolved in my favor. The bank apologized the way institutions do, formally, politely, uselessly. Steve moved out of the city, his name fading into a dull fact someone might mention at a party 3 years from now. Emily sent a final email with a forwarding address and a line that split me open and stitched me back together. Thank you for talking to me when it would have been easier to make me small. I slept through the night for the first time. I woke without reaching for my phone, without checking the door, without listening for thunder. The story had one more thing to do. It had to end, not with spectacle, not with an audience. In a kitchen where a man stood alone and made coffee and realized he would, in fact, love again. Not because he needed to prove he could. Because he wanted to be chosen and now understood how to choose back. The last time Emily and I spoke in person, it was at a park with ugly benches and beautiful trees. The kind of place where ordinary people practice forgiveness in small, private gestures. She wore a blue sweater and no ring. I wore a jacket even though the air didn't require it. We sat with a space between us just wide enough to fit the life we had lived. Birds said bright, silly things in the branches above us. Do you know why I begged you to talk? She asked, eyes on a child tugging a kite toward the sky like it had somewhere else to be. I waited. Because I was afraid the last version of me in your head would be the one who lied, she swallowed. I wanted to be fully seen at least once, even if you were leaving. She turned to me then. You did something I'll never forget, David. You held up the truth in a room full of people and did not turn it into blood. You cut clean. You let me live, she shook her head. I needed to be punished. You made me answer instead. I told her about the letters, about Clara, about tents in cathedrals and what safety looks like when it isn't a test of endurance. I told her I had learned to stop loving like a cure. She smiled, small and real. I don't know who we would have been if we had learned that earlier, she said, but I know who I might be now. She took a breath that sounded like a bow being drawn across a violin. I am in a program not for substances, for people like me who mistake applause for air, she laughed lightly. Turns out air is free. We sat quietly, a leaf detached itself and spun its slow, showy fall. Do you forgive me? She asked. The question landed softly without demand. Yes, I said, and the word surprised me with its warmth, not a judge's gavel, a door unlocking from the inside. Do you? I asked back. She blinked. Forgive you for not saving you, I said. She looked down at her hands. It was never your job, she said. I kept handing it to you because I was tired of carrying it. You gave it back. That was the kindest thing. We stood. She reached out not to hold me, but to touch the air near my sleeve, a small ritual goodbye. I hope the next person you love knows how to sit in a safe room without trying to find the exits, she said. I hope you do too, I replied. She walked away and I didn't watch her go. I watched the space she left and how the light moved into it as if it had been waiting. The house is mine. The attic keeps its strange archive, green dress, boxes of photos, a vase with a chip on the rim that cuts no one if you're careful. Friends come over and do not mention the dinner unless I do. My mother brings pies less like prayers and more like gifts. My brother sits on my porch and talks about basketball, about work, about a girl he's thinking of asking out. We are ordinary. Ordinary is a country I thought I had lost. Sometimes late, I take down the photo from the back of that last letter, the one of me mid-sentence, glass lifted, eyes clear. I do not see a man performing his dignity anymore. I see a man learning how to hold a boundary without making a spectacle of pain. I see the beginning of a story that doesn't start with someone else's betrayal, but with his own decision to be the kind of person who tells the truth even when his voice shakes. I put the photo back, I sleep. And there are mornings now when the light in the kitchen feels like forgiveness, when the coffee smells like promise instead of proof, when the quiet is not an accusation but a room to build in. On one of those mornings, I met someone in line at the bakery. She asked about the book in my hand. I told her too much about it, probably. She laughed, not like applause, not like a test, but like water poured into a clean glass. We shared a table, we shared a second cup. We did not share our past like resumes, we shared the morning. The climax, when it comes, is not thunder, it is a small, steady beat. The memory I made for Emily, one she will never forget, is not the dinner, not the envelope, not the photographs. It is the conversation in a quiet room where I did not let myself become a man whose only language was rage. It is the refusal to use humiliation as justice. It is the boundary that did not need to shout to be real. She will remember that because it's rare. So will I. There is a version of this story where I say I am completely healed, that trust slides into place like a well-oiled drawer, that love returns on schedule. That's a fairy tale. The truth is better. The truth is that I am different now, thinner in some places, stronger in others, more careful with my words and less careful with my joy. I know how to choose a person without needing them to save me. I know how to be chosen without hiding. That is the end I earned. That is the end I will not forget. Chosen without hiding. That is the end I earned. That is the end I will not forget.